They laughed when he slapped her, not because it was funny, but because it was safe. She was just the black maid, quiet, disposable, someone whose pain didn't interrupt dinner. Phones came out. Someone whispered. She didn't even flinch. Kang Dae-hwan smirked, wiping his hand like he'd touched something dirty. The marble floors of his Beverly Hills mansion reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead, casting fractured light across faces that had stopped pretending to be decent years ago. These weren't just wealthy men. They were architects of misery, dressed in Armani and drinking whiskey that cost more than most people's rent. What none of them noticed was the pause. The breath Naomi Brooks took afterward wasn't fear. It was balance. The same kind of breath a predator takes before striking, measured, controlled, intentional. Her hands, still holding the silver tray of champagne flutes, didn't tremble. Her eyes, downcast in the performance of submission, didn't water. Her jaw, which had absorbed the full force of Kang's open palm, didn't clench. For 2 years, Naomi had cleaned blood she didn't spill, listened to deals she pretended not to understand, and swallowed humiliation like it was part of the uniform. She had scrubbed wine stains from Persian rugs worth more than her childhood home in south-central LA. She had polished marble countertops where men discussed human lives with the same casual indifference they used to order takeout. She had bowed, smiled, and made herself so small that she became invisible. That night, something changed. Not because of the slap. Violence was nothing new. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where survival meant knowing which corners to avoid and which faces to never look at directly. She'd spent her teenage years in a place most people didn't believe existed, a closed martial arts school in the mountains of southern China, where discipline wasn't taught through encouragement but through endurance, where restraint wasn't weakness but the highest form of strength. No, the change came because she realized silence had stopped protecting the innocent and started protecting monsters. They thought her stillness meant weakness. They didn't know it was discipline. They thought she was untrained. They didn't know her body remembered forms older than their entire empire. They thought she was just another immigrant woman grateful for work, willing to endure anything to stay employed. They had no idea what they'd invited into their home. Kang Dae-hwan was 47, impeccably dressed, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. He'd built his fortune as a financier for the Korean Mafia, operating in Los Angeles, laundering money through art auctions in West Hollywood and tech startups in Silicon Valley. His mansion sat in the hills above Sunset Boulevard, a sprawling monument to wealth extracted from suffering. 14 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a wine cellar that could double as a bunker, and a staff of 12 people, most of them immigrants, all of them terrified. Naomi had been hired through an agency that specialized in discreet household staff. The interview lasted 5 minutes. She spoke minimal English, or so they thought. She had references from previous employers in San Francisco and Seattle, all of whom praised her work ethic and quietness. She was perfect, forgettable, compliant, the kind of employee who would see everything and say nothing. What they didn't know was that every word in her fabricated resume was a lie. What they didn't know was that Naomi Brooks had been watching them long before she ever walked through their door. And what they definitely didn't know was that when Kang raised his hand again, this time in front of men who believed themselves untouchable, she would catch it, not with anger, with precision. And in that moment, every predator in the room would understand the same terrifying truth. They hadn't hired a victim. They had invited a reckoning. The first time Naomi Brooks walked through the gates of the Kang estate, she counted 12 cameras, 3 armed guards, and 5 blind spots. She kept her head down, shoulders curved inward, the posture of someone who had learned not to take up space. Her uniform, a plain grey dress with a white apron, had been provided by the agency. It fit poorly, which was intentional. Nothing about her appearance suggested competence, strength, or awareness. She looked exactly like what they wanted. Another invisible woman, grateful for minimum wage and the privilege of cleaning up after rich people. The estate manager, a severe Korean woman named Mrs. Park, led her through the service entrance. You clean the main floor, guest wing, and Mr. Kang's private office. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact with Mr. Kang or his guests. You do not ask questions. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Naomi's voice was soft, accented with the flat vowels of someone who had learned English as a third or fourth language. Mrs. Park handed her a supply cart. Kitchen staff arrive at 6. Dinner service begins at 7. Mr. Kang entertains frequently. You will see many people come and go. You see nothing. You hear nothing. This is very important. I understand. Good. Many girls before you did not understand. They are no longer here. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Naomi nodded, hands folded, eyes on the floor. Inside, she was cataloguing everything. The layout of the security panel by the kitchen door, the rotation schedule of the guards visible through the window, the smell of cigarette smoke and expensive cologne that clung to everything in this house. This was not her first undercover operation. It was, however, the most dangerous. Naomi had been recruited by the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force 3 years earlier, though recruited wasn't quite accurate. She'd walked into the federal building in downtown Los Angeles with evidence that had taken her 18 months to gather: names, routes, financial records, photographs, evidence that had cost her everything she'd built in America after leaving China, evidence that had made her unemployable in legitimate work because the people she'd exposed had long memories and longer reach. The FBI agent who'd interviewed her, a tired woman named Sandra Reeves, had looked at the files and then at Naomi for a long time. You understand these people will kill you if they find out what you've done. Yes, and you understand we can't offer you witness protection until we have enough to prosecute. Yes. So why are you here? Naomi had been silent for a moment, thinking of the girl she'd found in a shipping container in San Pedro 2 years earlier. 14 years old, Filipino, so dehydrated she couldn't speak. The girl had died before the ambulance arrived, and Naomi had held her hand while she went, whispering promises she had no authority to make. Because someone has to stop them, she'd finally said. Sandra had nodded slowly. Then let's talk about what you're willing to do. What Naomi had been willing to do was become a ghost. Not in the witness protection sense, but in the operational one. She would take jobs in households, businesses, and organizations connected to trafficking networks. She would document everything. She would feed intelligence back to the task force through dead drops, encrypted phones, and brief meetings in public places. And she would do it all while maintaining the fiction that she was just another frightened immigrant woman trying to survive. The Kang operation was her 5th placement, and the most dangerous, because Kang Dae-wan wasn't just connected to trafficking, he was infrastructure. Money flowed through him like water through pipes. He made the entire West Coast operation possible, which meant taking him down would save hundreds of lives. It also meant if he discovered what she was, she wouldn't die quickly. Naomi began her first day, the way she would every day for the next 2 years. Invisible, efficient, and constantly aware. She cleaned the main floor with meticulous care, memorizing the locations of every piece of furniture, every artwork, every hidden camera. The mansion was designed to impress and intimidate. The foyer featured a chandelier that probably cost 6 figures. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles. You could see all the way to downtown on clear days, the skyscrapers rising from the smog like monuments to ambition and corruption. The guest wing was where Kang entertained. There were 5 bedrooms, each decorated in a different style: French provincial, modern minimalist, traditional Korean. All of them had hidden cameras. Naomi had spotted them within the first hour. Kang liked to record his guests, probably for blackmail or insurance. It was a smart strategy in his line of work. Kang's private office was on the 2nd floor, behind a door that was always locked, unless he was inside. Naomi had been given explicit instructions never to enter unless summoned, which told her everything she needed to know about what was in there. She finished the main floor by noon and moved to the kitchen for lunch. The kitchen staff, 2 women from Guatemala, an older Korean man who served as the house chef, and a teenager who did prep work, ate quickly and didn't make conversation. This was not a house where employees bonded. It was a house where everyone understood their survival depended on minding their own business. Naomi ate her rice and vegetables in silence, listening. The Guatemalan women spoke in quiet Spanish about their families back home. The chef read a Korean newspaper, The teenager scrolled through his phone. Normal sounds, surface sounds, the kind of normalcy that existed in every workplace where people were just trying to get through the day. But underneath, Naomi could feel it, the tension, the fear, the understanding that this house operated according to rules that had nothing to do with labor law or human decency. At 2 in the afternoon, Kang arrived home. She heard him before she saw him. The low rumble of an expensive car in the driveway, the sharp click of dress shoes on marble, the commanding voice issuing orders in Korean to someone on the phone. She was dusting the living room when he walked past, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He didn't look at her. She might as well have been furniture. Good. Over the next weeks, Naomi established her pattern. She arrived at 6, cleaned until noon, took a brief lunch, and continued until 5. She was punctual, thorough, and forgettable. She learned the household's rhythm. Kang entertained guests 3 or 4 nights a week, usually men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices about things they didn't want overheard. Sometimes there were women too, dressed in designer clothes and fake smiles, who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. She learned which rooms were important. The office, obviously. The basement wine cellar, which had a door that didn't match the aesthetic of the rest of the house. Industrial, reinforced, with a keypad lock instead of a traditional one. The pool house, which was used for private meetings that even the bodyguards weren't allowed to attend. She learned the staff's stories. Maria, one of the Guatemalan women, had a son in San Diego she saw once a month. The chef, Mr. Kim, had worked for Kang for 8 years and had the dead eyes of someone who'd seen things he could never speak about. The teenager, whose name was David, was putting himself through community college and tried not to think too hard about where his paychecks came from. And she learned Kang Dae-hwan's patterns. He woke at 7. He worked out in the private gym for exactly 45 minutes. He took breakfast on the terrace overlooking the city, reading financial reports on his tablet. He left the house by 9 and returned between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. He entertained most evenings. He never raised his voice. He never had to. Everything about him radiated control, which is why the first slap, 6 weeks into her employment, was such a performance. It happened during a dinner party. 20 guests, all men, all part of Kang's network. Naomi was serving drinks, moving silently between clusters of conversation, refilling glasses, removing empty plates. She'd learned to make herself invisible during these events. No eye contact, no expression, no evidence of consciousness. She was near the fireplace when Kang called out, "You, come here." Naomi approached, head down, hands folded. "Yes, sir." He was holding an empty glass. "This glass is dirty. Did you not check the dishes before service?" She took the glass, examined it. There was a small smudge near the rim lipstick, probably from a previous event, missed by whoever washed it. A minor mistake, the kind of thing that happened in any household. "I apologize, sir. I will replace it immediately. You will apologize properly." Something in his tone made the room go quiet. The conversation stopped. The guests turned to watch. Naomi felt the shift in atmosphere, anticipation, cruelty, the particular kind of excitement that came from watching someone else's humiliation. She bowed. "I apologize, Mr. Kang. It was my oversight. It will not happen again." "No," he said, standing. "It will not." The slap came so fast she didn't have time to prepare. His palm connected with her cheek, with enough force to snap her head to the side. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room. Pain bloomed across her face, sharp and hot. She didn't cry out, didn't stagger, didn't drop the glass. The room held its breath, and then someone laughed. A nervous, uncertain laugh, like they weren't sure if this was part of the entertainment or something they should pretend not to see. But once one person laughed, others followed. Not because it was funny, but because it was safe. Because this was just the help. Because people who served drinks didn't have feelings that mattered. Phones came out. Someone was recording. Kang wiped his hand on a napkin, as if touching her had dirtied him. "Clean glasses. Is that so difficult?" "No, sir." Her voice was steady. "I apologize. Get out of my sight." Naomi bowed and walked away, her footsteps measured, her breathing controlled. She didn't touch her face, didn't let them see the rage that was building in her chest like a tsunami gathering force. In the kitchen, Maria looked at her with sympathy and fear. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Naomi replaced the dirty glass with a clean one, checked her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. Her cheek was already red, would probably bruise. "It was my mistake." Maria said nothing else. What was there to say? This was the job. This was the life. You endured, or you left. But what Maria didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that Naomi Brooks didn't endure. She documented. She waited. She prepared. That night, after the guests left and the house went dark, Naomi stood in her small bedroom in the staff quarters and wrote down everything she'd seen. The faces of the men who'd laughed, the make and model of the phones that had recorded her humiliation, the way Kang had looked at her afterward, not with anger, but with satisfaction, like he'd proven a point about power and its prerogatives. She sent an encrypted message to her FBI handler. "Incident, tonight. Recorded. May be useful for character evidence." The response came 30 seconds later. "Are you safe? For now. Can you continue?" Naomi looked at herself in the mirror. Her cheek was swelling, the skin tight and hot. Tomorrow she would have a bruise. People would see it and know exactly what it meant. Some would feel sorry for her. Most would be grateful it hadn't been them. "Yes," she typed. "I can continue." She had come here for a reason. The slap didn't change that. If anything, it clarified things. These men believed they could do whatever they wanted to people they considered beneath them. They believed their money, their connections, their power made them untouchable. They were wrong, and Naomi would prove it. But not yet. Not with anger, not with violence, with patience, with documentation, with the slow, methodical work of gathering evidence that would destroy them in ways they couldn't predict or defend against. She lay down in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Her cheek throbbed, her jaw ached, but her mind was clear, focused, processing everything she'd learned tonight about how these men operated, what they valued, what they feared. Tomorrow she would bow and scrub floors and be invisible again. But every day, she was building something. They couldn't see a case, a record, a reckoning. They had laughed at her pain. Soon, they would learn what happened to people who mistook patience for weakness. Soon. But not yet. For now, she would be the maid no one noticed, the woman whose suffering didn't interrupt dinner, the ghost in their house, gathering their secrets while they slept. The bruise on Naomi's face lasted 5 days. She didn't try to hide it. Makeup would have suggested vanity, and vanity would have suggested she thought of herself as someone whose appearance mattered. Instead, she wore it like part of her uniform, visible proof that she had learned her place. The other staff members treated her with the careful distance reserved for marked prey. Maria stopped making eye contact during lunch. Mr. Kim gave her the easier cleaning assignments, the ones that kept her away from Kang and his guests. David, the teenager, looked at her with barely concealed pity, which was almost worse than the violence had been. Only Mrs. Park seemed unsurprised. The estate manager saw Naomi's face and nodded once, as if confirming something she'd always known. "You will be more careful from now on." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Kang is a generous employer, but he requires excellence." "I understand." Mrs. Park's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she knew exactly what kind of excellence Kang required, and it had nothing to do with clean glasses. "Some people are not suited for this work. They leave." "I'm not leaving." "Then you are smarter than you look." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. Over the following weeks, Naomi learned to navigate the house's true geography, not the physical layout of rooms and hallways, but the invisible map of power, secrets, and danger that determined who survived and who disappeared. She learned that certain guests arrived through the service entrance, not the main gate. They came in unmarked cars, usually late at night, and went directly to the wine cellar. They never stayed long. Sometimes they left with briefcases. Sometimes they left with nothing visible, but their pockets were weighted differently than when they'd arrived. Money. Always money, flowing through this house like blood through a body. She learned that the pool house was used for business meetings that occurred between 1 and 3 in the morning. The bodyguards stood outside during these meetings, facing away from the windows. Whatever happened inside was not their concern. Naomi never saw who attended these meetings, but she heard them, sometimes male voices speaking Korean and English, tense conversations that never quite rose to shouting but vibrated with barely contained violence. She learned that the industrial door in the wine cellar opened onto a staircase that went down, not up. She couldn't access it. The keypad required a code she didn't have, but she'd seen Kang and 2 bodyguards go down there once, and when they emerged 30 minutes later, Kang's expression was different, satisfied, like a man who'd just confirmed his possessions were exactly where he'd left them. Possessions, not property, not merchandise. Possessions. The word choice mattered, but the most important thing Naomi learned was that the house itself kept secrets from Kang. There were conversations the staff had when they thought no one was listening, whispers in the laundry room, quick exchanges in the garden. Maria once mentioned to Mr. Kim that she'd heard crying from the wine cellar last month, and Mr. Kim had replied in Spanish that some sounds were better forgotten. There were maintenance workers who came and went, installing cameras in new locations, reinforcing doors, updating security systems. They didn't speak to the household staff, but Naomi watched them work and noted which areas were being fortified. The wine cellar, the pool house, the second-floor office, all the places that mattered. And there were the other women. Naomi first noticed them in her 3rd month at the estate. They never came through the main house. They stayed in the guest wing, but not in the decorated bedrooms meant for Kang's associates. There was a separate entrance through the garden, leading to 3 rooms that didn't appear on any blueprint or security plan Naomi had seen. She discovered their existence by accident, taking trash to the outdoor bins late one evening. A door she'd assumed was a storage closet opened, and a young woman stepped out, Asian, maybe 20 years old, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Their eyes met for half a second before the woman looked away, terrified, and retreated back inside. The door closed. Naomi heard multiple locks engage. She stood there, trash bag in hand, mind racing. The woman's expression hadn't been fearful of Naomi. It had been fearful of being seen at all, of existing outside the space she'd been confined to. That wasn't the fear of an employee. It was the fear of property. Naomi filed it away, kept moving, finished her task, and returned to the staff quarters. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, thinking about locks that only worked from the outside, about women who weren't allowed to be visible, about Kang's expression when he emerged from the wine cellar. The next day, she paid closer attention to the garden entrance. It was partially hidden by landscaping, tall hedges, decorative screens, strategic placement of fountains and sculptures, easy to miss if you didn't know to look for it. But once she knew it existed, she saw the patterns. Deliveries came through that entrance twice a week. Always the same truck, always the same driver, always between 2 and 4 in the afternoon when most of the staff were inside. The driver never carried boxes or bags. He carried nothing at all. He just opened the back of the truck, and sometimes women got out. Not always, but sometimes. They moved quickly, heads down, escorted by one of Kang's bodyguards, into the hidden section of the guest wing. The entire transfer took less than 2 minutes. Then the truck left, the garden entrance closed, and the house continued as if nothing had happened. Naomi documented it all. Dates, times, descriptions of the truck, license plate, physical descriptions of the women when she could see them clearly enough. She sent encrypted reports to Sandra Reeves, her FBI handler, and received terse confirmations. Received. Continue observation. Do not engage. The capital letters were Sandra's way of emphasizing what they both knew. If Naomi revealed herself, if she tried to help these women directly, the entire operation would collapse. Kang would kill her. He would move his operations. The network would adapt, and the women would still be trapped. But now, in places the FBI couldn't see. So Naomi watched, and waited, and hated every moment of her own helplessness. The isolation was its own kind of violence. She couldn't talk to the other staff about what she'd seen. They either knew and were too frightened to acknowledge it, or they genuinely didn't know and would panic if they found out. She couldn't confide in anyone, couldn't process the things she witnessed, couldn't even write them down in plain language, because if someone found her notes, she'd be dead before she could explain. Everything went into code. Everything went through dead drops and encrypted phones and brief, impersonal exchanges with Sandra in parking lots or shopping malls. "How are you holding up?" Sandra asked once, during a meeting at a Target in Culver City. "I'm fine." Naomi was examining paper towels, as if deciding which brand to buy. "You don't look fine. I need more time. You've been in there 4 months. We have enough for a money laundering case." "That's not enough. You'll arrest Kang, and whoever's running the trafficking operation will just find someone else to finance them. We need the whole network." "Naomi, more time." Sandra had looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're authorized to extract immediately if you're compromised. Don't be a hero." Naomi had almost laughed. Being a hero would be easier. Heroes got to act. She was being asked to be a witness, to observe atrocities and write reports, to swallow her rage and pretend she didn't care. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and it was about to get harder. The cultural isolation was another layer of the operation's design. Most of Kang's household staff were immigrants, many of them undocumented, all of them vulnerable. He preferred employees who had something to lose, who couldn't easily go to the police, who would prioritize survival over justice. Kang himself moved between worlds with practiced ease. In public, at his art auctions in West Hollywood or tech conferences in San Francisco, he was charming, sophisticated, a success story. The Korean immigrant who'd made it big in Los Angeles, philanthropist, patron of the arts, investor in promising startups. In private, he was something else entirely. Naomi saw it most clearly during the dinners he hosted for his inner circle. These weren't the large parties with 20 or 30 guests. These were intimate gatherings of 6 or 7 men, all Korean, all speaking in rapid dialect that even Naomi's language training couldn't fully follow. They ate expensive food and drank expensive wine and discussed things in euphemisms that were probably clear to them but opaque to anyone listening. She served at these dinners, moving between courses with practiced invisibility, and she listened. Sometimes they talked about inventory and shipping schedules. Sometimes they discussed new markets and quality control issues. Once, she heard one man complain about a product that had been damaged in transit and couldn't be resold at market value. The casual cruelty of reducing human beings to inventory made Naomi's hands shake as she poured wine, but she kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, her expression that of someone who didn't understand what she was hearing. One evening, during one of these dinners, Kang mentioned something that made her blood go cold. "The Los Angeles operation has been too visible," he said in Korean. "The feds are asking questions about shipping routes. We'll pivot to Phoenix and Seattle for the next quarter. Let LA cool down." The others nodded. Someone mentioned that Phoenix was less saturated and had better access to distribution channels. Naomi almost dropped the wine bottle. Phoenix, Seattle, distribution channels. They weren't just operating in Los Angeles. This was regional, possibly national. The scope was so much larger than even the FBI had suspected. She needed to get this information to Sandra immediately, but her next scheduled contact wasn't for 3 days, and she couldn't risk an unscheduled meeting. Everything about her routine had to remain predictable, unremarkable. 3 days. She could manage 3 days. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Naomi felt the weight of what she'd learned pressing down on her chest like physical force. How many women? How many cities? How many lives ruined while she scrubbed floors and played the obedient maid? She thought about the girl in the shipping container in San Pedro, the one who died holding Naomi's hand. The promises Naomi had made that she wouldn't let her death be meaningless, that someone would answer for what had been done to her. That girl had been part of this network. She'd been inventory, merchandise, a product damaged in transit. Naomi's hands curled into fists. She forced herself to breathe, to release the tension, to return to center. Anger was a weapon, but only if you controlled it. Rage that consumed you was useless. Rage that fueled discipline, focus, purpose, that was power. She'd learned that in the mountains of southern China, in a school that taught martial arts, the way monks taught meditation, as a path to enlightenment, through perfect control. Her teacher, Master Wei, had been a woman who looked like someone's grandmother and moved like water over stone. She'd taken in Naomi when she was 13, an angry, grieving kid who'd lost her parents to violence and wanted to learn how to hurt people back. Master Wei had taught her something better: how to stop violence before it started, how to read intention in the shift of weight, the flicker of eyes, the quality of breath, how to neutralize threats without destroying yourself in the process. The sword that never leaves its sheath is the most powerful weapon, Master Wei used to say, because everyone knows it's there. Everyone knows what would happen if it were drawn, so it never has to be. Naomi had been with Master Wei for 5 years, training 8 hours a day, learning forms that were 500 years old and principles that were eternal. She'd left at 18, with a body that was a weapon and a mind that was a fortress, and she'd come to America thinking she could leave violence behind forever. She'd been naive. Violence had found her anyway. It always did. But now she had choices about how to respond to it. She could become the thing she'd learned to fight, or she could be something better, the sword that stayed sheathed until the moment it was absolutely necessary. That moment wasn't here yet, but it was coming. She could feel it in the house's rhythm, in the way Kang looked at her sometimes, like he was trying to decide if she was as simple as she seemed, in the increased security, the more frequent meetings, the nervous energy of people who sensed law enforcement circling but couldn't pinpoint the source. Something was building, some crisis or opportunity that would force everyone's hand, and when it came, Naomi would be ready, not to fight, not yet, but to document, to observe, to gather the final pieces of evidence that would bring down not just Kang, but everyone connected to him, the women in the hidden rooms, the drivers who delivered them, the buyers who purchased them, the financiers who profited from their suffering. All of it. That was the promise she'd made to the girl in the shipping container. That was the reason she endured Kang's violence and contempt. That was why she could lie in bed, hands steady, breathing controlled, mind clear despite the horror she lived inside every day. Because she was building something they couldn't see. A case, a weapon, justice. And when the moment came, when she finally drew the sword that had stayed sheathed for so long, it would end them all. The first time Naomi almost broke cover was on a Tuesday in late summer. She'd been at the estate for 7 months. The routine was so established that sometimes she forgot she was pretending. The bowing, the quiet voice, the downcast eyes had become second nature. She could move through the house without thinking, her hands knowing which surfaces to clean, her feet knowing which floorboards creaked. It was muscle memory, survival memory, the same kind of adaptive camouflage that prey animals develop to avoid predators. But underneath, she was still herself, still aware, still counting the days until she had enough evidence to bring this house down. That Tuesday changed things. She was cleaning the second-floor hallway when she heard shouting from Kang's office. Male voices. Angry. The kind of argument that was seconds away from violence. She slowed her dusting, positioning herself near a side table where she could listen without appearing to. The office door was thick, but not soundproof. She caught fragments. Can't just disappear women without explaining. Not your concern how I run my inventory. FBI breathing down our necks because you got sloppy. Watching your tone when you address me. The argument escalated. Something hit the wall, glass breaking, then silence, sharp and sudden, the way quiet falls after gunfire. Naomi's pulse quickened. She started to move away, back to the stairs, but the office door opened, and one of Kang's associates stumbled out. He was Korean, maybe 40, wearing an expensive suit, now disheveled and stained with what looked like whiskey. Blood trickled from his lip. He saw Naomi and stopped. Their eyes met. In that moment, she saw everything. Humiliation, rage, fear, and underneath it all, hatred. Not for Kang, who'd just hit him, for her, for being there, for witnessing his shame. "What are you looking at?" His English was accented but clear. Naomi dropped her gaze. "Nothing, sir." "I apologize." "You saw nothing." "Yes, sir." He stepped closer. She could smell alcohol and cologne and sweat. "You people are all the same. You think if you see something, you can use it. You think you matter." Naomi said nothing, kept her eyes down, kept her breathing steady. But her body was already calculating distance, angles, vulnerable points. If he touched her, if he made it physical, she'd have to make a choice, maintain cover, or protect herself. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She raised her eyes, slowly, carefully, giving nothing away. He studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. "You're the one he hit last month. The one with the dirty glass." "Yes, sir." "You didn't quit." "No, sir." "Smart or stupid? Haven't decided which." He wiped blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "Let me give you some advice. There are things in this house you don't want to understand, questions you don't want answers to, rooms you don't want to see inside. You follow the rules, you bow, you clean, you survive. You start paying attention." He leaned in close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. "You end up in one of those rooms." He straightened, smoothed his suit, and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the marble stairs. The front door opened and closed. Naomi stood there, heart pounding, hands gripping the dusting cloth so tightly her knuckles were white. That was the closest she'd come to breaking. If he'd touched her, if he'd put his hands on her the way Kang had, she didn't know if she could have maintained control. And that terrified her. Not the violence itself, but the loss of control. The possibility that her discipline, her training, her years of learning to be still and patient and precise, could shatter under the weight of rage she'd been carrying for 7 months. She forced herself to breathe, counted to 10, then 20. Let the adrenaline drain, let her pulse slow, let her mind clear. This was the line. This was the moment Master Wei had warned her about. "There will come a time," her teacher had said, years ago in the mountains, "when you will have to choose between discipline and release, between the patience of stone and the violence of lightning." Most people think this choice is about strength. It's not. It's about identity, who you are when no one is watching, who you become when given permission to destroy. Naomi had been 16 when Master Wei said that. She hadn't understood. Now she did. She could hurt these men, easily. She'd spent years training in forms designed for warfare, for killing, for turning the human body into something more dangerous than weapons. She could walk into Kang's office right now and end him before his bodyguards could react. She could clear this entire house in under 5 minutes if she let herself. But that wasn't justice. That was revenge. And revenge was temporary satisfaction followed by permanent consequences. She'd be dead or imprisoned. Kang's network would continue under new management. The women in the hidden rooms would stay trapped. The trafficking operation would adapt and survive. No, this required patience, discipline, the long, slow work of building a case that would destroy not just Kang, but the entire system he represented, even if it meant enduring threats, humiliation, violence, even if it meant some days she woke up and didn't recognize herself in the mirror, this woman who bowed to monsters, who cleaned their floors while they discussed human trafficking like it was a business expense. Naomi finished dusting the hallway, moved to the next room, continued her work as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted, some internal barometer that measured how much more she could take. She'd started this operation believing she could endure anything for as long as necessary. Now she knew that wasn't true. She had limits, breaking points, lines that, if crossed, would destroy her ability to remain undercover. That night, she met Sandra Reeves in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Burbank. Sandra was pretending to shop for bathroom fixtures. Naomi was pretending to browse garden supplies. They passed each other in an aisle, and Naomi slipped a micro SD card into Sandra's shopping bag. "You okay?" Sandra asked quietly, not looking at her. "Define okay. Can you continue?" Naomi picked up a packet of seeds, examined it like she was considering planting tomatoes. "How much longer?" "We're close." The financial team traced 3 shell companies back to Kang. We have documentation of money transfers to 6 different trafficking networks. We just need evidence linking him directly to the transportation operation. The wine cellar. There's a door with a keypad. Whatever's down there is the connection you need. Can you access it? Not without compromising my cover. Sandra was quiet for a moment, weighing risks. What if we created a situation where you had legitimate reason to be down there? Maintenance, emergency, something like that. Too obvious. Kang's paranoid. If anything unusual happens right now, he'll lock down. Might move the operation entirely. Then what do you suggest? Naomi put the seed packet back. He's planning something. Big. I don't know what yet. But there's been increased activity. More meetings. More deliveries. Whatever's coming. He'll need to access the wine cellar more frequently. That's when I'll get my chance. And if that doesn't happen, then we go with what we have. Arrest him on financial charges. I testify about what I've witnessed. It won't destroy the network, but it'll wound it. Sandra nodded slowly. You've done good work here, Naomi. More than we had any right to ask. I haven't done anything yet. Not until those women are safe. You can't save everyone. I can try. They separated. Sandra headed toward checkout. Naomi browsed for another 10 minutes, bought nothing, and drove back to the estate. It was after midnight when she arrived. The house was dark except for security lights and the dim glow from Kang's second-floor office. He was still awake, probably reviewing financial reports or communicating with associates. Naomi let herself in through the staff entrance, climbed the stairs to her small room, and locked the door. She sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what she was doing. The fear, the exhaustion, the corrosive effect of watching suffering and doing nothing. The way violence, even when you didn't commit it yourself, left marks on your soul. Then she pushed it down, locked it away, and focused on what mattered, getting evidence, protecting the women in the hidden rooms, bringing down everyone connected to this nightmare. She thought about the man who'd threatened her today, the one who'd warned her about asking questions, about seeing too much, about ending up in one of those rooms. He'd meant it as a deterrent, but he'd also given her something valuable, confirmation that the rooms existed, that they were known, that people who got too curious ended up there, which meant the wine cellar wasn't just a storage space. It was part of the operation, maybe a holding area, maybe worse. Naomi lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, planning. She couldn't force access to the wine cellar, but she could be ready when opportunity presented itself. She could position herself, be in the right place at the right time, use the chaos of whatever Kang was planning to finally see what he was hiding. It was risky, but everything about this operation was risky. The difference now was that she knew her own limits. She knew that if pushed too far, she would break cover, which meant she had to finish this before that happened. Soon, one way or another. Soon. In the darkness, Naomi's hands moved through familiar forms, strikes and blocks practiced 10,000 times. Muscle memory etched so deep it didn't require conscious thought. It calmed her, centered her, reminded her that discipline wasn't about never feeling rage. It was about choosing how to channel it. She would not become the thing she was fighting. She would not let anger transform her into another predator. She would remain herself, patient, precise, purposeful. But the line was there now, visible, close, and every day in this house brought her closer to it. The sword was still sheathed, but her hand was on the hilt, and everyone in this house, whether they knew it or not, was running out of time. Is less than break time equals 85 seconds. Is greater than is less than break time equals 85 seconds. Is greater than is less than break time equals 85 seconds. Is greater than is less than break time equals 85 seconds. Is greater than. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, during what should have been an ordinary Friday afternoon. Naomi was cleaning the guest wing when she heard raised voices from the garden entrance. She glanced out the window and saw Kang arguing with the delivery driver, the one who brought women through the hidden entrance twice a week. They were speaking Korean, rapid and heated, and even from a distance, Naomi could see the driver was scared. Something had gone wrong. Some part of the system had broken down. Kang's bodyguards moved closer to the driver, aggressive postures, hands near weapons that were probably concealed under their jackets. The driver was gesturing frantically, explaining something, clearly desperate to convince Kang that whatever had happened wasn't his fault. Then Kang turned and walked toward the house, pulling out his phone, issuing orders to someone. The bodyguards followed. The driver stood there for a moment, looking like a man who'd just avoided death by inches, then got in his truck and drove away faster than was probably safe on the narrow estate roads. Naomi's pulse quickened. Something was happening, some crisis that required Kang's immediate attention, which meant the normal routine would be disrupted, which meant opportunities. She continued cleaning, moving closer to the main staircase so she could hear what was happening below. Kang was in the foyer, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped sentences. "Don't care what the schedule says. We need to move them tonight. Route through San Diego instead. The LA ports are compromised. Have the manifest ready by 8. I'll handle customs documentation." A pause. Then, quieter but more dangerous. "If anything goes wrong with this shipment, everyone involved will answer to me personally. Do you understand?" Silence. Presumably the person on the other end was confirming they understood. Kang ended the call and turned to one of his bodyguards. "Get June. Tell him to prepare the holding area. We may need to store the San Diego shipment here temporarily, until we secure alternative transportation." The holding area. Naomi's hands froze on the window she was cleaning. The holding area had to be the wine cellar, the space behind the industrial door, the place where inventory was kept. This was it, the crisis she'd been waiting for. Tonight, there would be activity, chaos. Kang and his people focused on solving whatever problem had developed. If she was smart, if she was careful, she could use that distraction to see what was behind that door. But it had to be tonight. If they moved quickly to resolve the crisis, the opportunity would vanish as fast as it had appeared. Naomi finished the guest wing and returned to the staff quarters. It was 3 in the afternoon. The household staff would leave at 5, except for Mr. Kim, who stayed late on Fridays to prepare weekend meals. The bodyguards rotated shifts, but during high-stress situations, they all stayed on property. She needed a reason to be in the house tonight, some legitimate excuse that wouldn't raise suspicion. During dinner service, as she was helping Mr. Kim plate desserts, she made her move. "Mr. Kim, I apologize, but I've made an error." The chef looked up from the creme brulee he was torching. "What error?" "I forgot to complete inventory for next week's supplies. Mrs. Park asked me to have it ready by Monday morning. I should have done it today, but I was focused on cleaning and forgot. Would it be acceptable if I returned this evening to complete it? It should only take an hour." Mr. Kim frowned. He didn't like staff being in the house outside normal hours, but he also didn't want to get blamed if Mrs. Park was upset about the inventory. "You will work in the supply room only. You will not go to other parts of the house." "Of course. I'll arrive at 7, complete the inventory, and leave immediately. Mrs. Park will hear about this delay." "I understand. I apologize for the inconvenience." He nodded curtly and returned to his work. It wasn't enthusiastic permission, but it was permission. Naomi finished helping with desserts, then left with the other staff at 5 o'clock. She drove to a shopping center 2 miles away and parked in a lot where she could see the entrance, but wouldn't be immediately visible from the street. She used the time to prepare mentally, running through possible scenarios. Best case, she could access the wine cellar while everyone was distracted, document what she found, and leave without being noticed. The evidence would give the FBI everything they needed to raid the property and arrest everyone involved. Worst case, she'd be caught, her cover would be blown, and she'd have to fight her way out. That would end the investigation and possibly get her killed. But it might also force the FBI to move immediately, to raid the house before Kang could destroy evidence or move the women somewhere else. There were a dozen scenarios between those extremes, most of them bad in different ways. But Naomi had long since accepted that this operation would end messily. The question was whether it ended with justice or failure. At 6:45, she drove back to the estate. The security guard at the gate recognized her car and waved her through without question. Staff coming and going outside normal hours wasn't common, but it wasn't unprecedented either. She parked in the employee lot and entered through the service entrance. The kitchen was empty. Mr. Kim had finished for the day and left, which was unusual but lucky. The house felt different at night, when most of the staff were gone. Less populated, more threatening. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers stopped being symbols of wealth and became evidence of everything wrong with the world. Beauty built on suffering, luxury funded by exploitation. Naomi went to the supply room and actually did the inventory, in case someone checked later. It took 20 minutes. Then she sat at the small desk and listened. Footsteps above her, voices, the house's normal sounds, but with an undercurrent of tension. Whatever crisis had developed this afternoon was still active, still demanding attention. At 7:40, she heard what she'd been waiting for, Kang's voice, sharp with command, issuing orders. She moved to the doorway and saw him descending the main staircase with 3 of his bodyguards and 2 men she didn't recognize. They were all heading toward the wine cellar. This was the moment. While they were down there, while their attention was focused on whatever they were doing, she could position herself to see what they'd left behind. Maybe not get inside, but at least see through the door, confirm what was being held there. Naomi waited until they disappeared into the wine cellar, then moved quietly through the house. Her feet knew which floorboards creaked. Her hands knew which doors made noise. She'd spent 7 months learning this space, and now that knowledge would either save her or destroy her. The wine cellar entrance was at the end of a short hallway off the main living area. The industrial door was open. They'd left it open while they were inside, probably because they were moving things in and out. Naomi could hear voices from below. Kang giving instructions, the bodyguards confirming they understood, and something else softer, frightened, female. Her blood went cold. She moved closer, staying in the shadows until she could see down the stairs. The space below was lit by harsh fluorescent lights, completely at odds with the elegant aesthetic of the rest of the house. It looked like a warehouse. Concrete floors, metal shelving, and along one wall, cages. Not cells, not rooms, cages. The kind you'd keep animals in. 6 of them, each barely 6 feet by 6 feet, with thin blankets on the floors and buckets in the corners. 4 of them were occupied. Young women, Asian, sitting or lying on the thin blankets, looking at nothing with eyes that had given up hope. Naomi's training, her discipline, her years of learning to control emotion, all of it threatened to shatter in that moment. She'd known, intellectually, what was happening here. She'd heard the conversations, seen the patterns, documented the evidence, but knowing and seeing were different things. Seeing made it real in a way that reports and encrypted messages couldn't. One of the bodyguards was opening an empty cage, preparing it for new occupants. Kang was on his phone again, coordinating something. The 2 strangers were examining the women already caged, pointing, discussing something in low voices, evaluating. That's what they were doing, evaluating the merchandise. Naomi's hands clenched into fists. She forced herself to breathe, to stay still, to remember that this wasn't the time. Attacking now would save 4 women and doom hundreds, would stop this one operation and allow the network to continue elsewhere. She needed evidence. She needed photos. She needed her phone. She'd left it in the supply room. Smart practice phones could be tracked, could give away your position. But right now, she needed it, needed to document this, needed proof that would be undeniable, that would force law enforcement to act immediately. But leaving and coming back was too risky. The moment could pass. The door could close. They might hear her moving through the house. As she watched, trying to decide what to do, one of the women in the cages looked up. Their eyes met. The woman's expression didn't change, no hope, no recognition, just the blank stare of someone who'd learned that awareness only brought pain. Then the woman did something small, almost imperceptible. She tilted her head slightly toward the stairs, toward freedom, and closed her eyes, a gesture of resignation, or permission. Do what you can, or don't. It doesn't matter. We're already gone. That small gesture, that tiny acknowledgement of shared humanity, broke something in Naomi. Not her discipline, something deeper. The part of her that had been able to maintain emotional distance, to treat this as an operation rather than a moral imperative. These weren't case files. They weren't intelligence assets or evidence or elements of a prosecution strategy. They were people, young women who'd been promised jobs or education or safety, who'd trusted someone and ended up in cages in a basement in Beverly Hills. Naomi memorized every detail she could see, the layout of the room, the number of cages, the faces of the men involved, the way the women sat, the condition of their clothing, the bucket in each cage that meant they weren't allowed out, even for basic human necessities. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs and retreated back into the shadows. The two strangers emerged first, talking in Korean about delivery schedules and quality concerns. Then the bodyguards. Then Kang, last, locking the industrial door behind him with a keypad code. She couldn't see the sequence from her angle, but she saw him enter it. 6 digits, pressed with practiced speed. They walked past her hiding spot without looking. Why would they? The household staff were gone. The house was secure. No one would be stupid enough to sneak around during a high-security operation, except Naomi, who waited until they were gone, then moved silently back to the supply room, retrieved her phone, and took the long route back to the wine cellar hallway. The door was locked now, but she had something else. She opened her phone's camera, turned off the flash, and photographed everything she could: the door itself, the keypad, the hallway approach, the sight lines that showed how isolated this entrance was from the main house. It wasn't enough. She needed photos of what was behind the door. But she'd seen it. She could testify, could describe in detail what Kang was keeping in his basement, combined with the financial evidence the FBI had gathered, combined with the documentation she'd been building for 7 months. It would be enough. It had to be enough, because she couldn't stay here much longer. Not after what she'd seen. Not with the knowledge of those 4 women in cages burning in her mind like acid. Naomi finished the fake inventory, locked the supply room, and left through the service entrance. The security guard logged her out 1955, right in the expected time frame for someone completing administrative work. She drove back to the shopping center parking lot, pulled into a dark corner, and finally allowed herself to feel it. All of it. The rage, the grief, the helpless fury of witnessing suffering she couldn't immediately stop. Her hands shook as she called Sandra's emergency number. It rang twice. Naomi, what's wrong? I saw it. The holding area. There are cages. There are women in cages right now. Silence. Then, how many? 4. Maybe more. Kang's moving another shipment tonight. I heard him coordinating it. Can you give me location details? Naomi described everything. The wine cellar, the industrial door, the layout below, the exact location within the house. Sandra was silent while she talked, but Naomi could hear her typing, recording every word. When she finished, Sandra said, "We'll move on this. Tonight if possible. How solid is your cover? Compromised. I don't think they saw me, but I can't go back. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. Understood. Can you get somewhere safe?" "Yes. There's a hotel in Santa Monica I've been using as a backup. I'll go there and wait for instructions." "Good, Naomi." Sandra's voice softened. "You did the right thing. This was the break we needed. Tell that to the women in those cages. We're going to get them out. I promise." Naomi ended the call. She sat in the dark parking lot for another 10 minutes, letting her breathing return to normal, letting the adrenaline drain. Then she drove to Santa Monica, checked into a hotel under the false name she'd established months ago, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. She'd seen the room that shouldn't exist. She'd documented it. She'd reported it. The FBI would raid the estate, probably within 24 hours. Kang and everyone connected to him would be arrested. The women would be freed. It was over. After 7 months, the operation was finally over. So why didn't she feel victorious? Why did she feel like she'd failed? Like 7 months of patience and discipline had led to a moment where she'd still been too late, where women had suffered in cages while she cleaned floors and bowed to monsters, and built a case that could have been built faster, better, sooner. There were no good answers to those questions, just the knowledge that justice was slow, that systems took time, that saving some people meant others suffered while you worked. It wasn't fair. It wasn't clean. It was just the terrible mathematics of law enforcement in a world where cruelty was profitable and the powerful could buy protection. Naomi lay back on the hotel bed, fully clothed, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow the news would break. Tomorrow Kang's mansion would be surrounded by federal agents. Tomorrow those 4 women would be freed from their cages. But tonight, they were still there, still trapped, still suffering, and there was nothing she could do except wait. The FBI didn't raid the mansion that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Naomi sat in the Santa Monica hotel room, watching news channels and checking her encrypted messages every 30 minutes, waiting for word that the operation had moved forward. Nothing. Just Sandra's terse updates. Stand by. Coordinating with local PD. Warrant processing. Stay safe. By the 3rd day, Naomi couldn't take it anymore. She called Sandra's emergency line. "Why haven't you moved?" "Good morning to you too." Sandra's voice was tight with stress. "We're moving as fast as we can. The LA District Attorney wants to coordinate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which means multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions, paperwork you wouldn't believe. There are women in cages. I know that. You think I don't know that. But if we move too fast and the case falls apart on technicalities, Kang walks and those women end up back in the system. We need this to be airtight." "How long?" 48 hours. Maybe less. We're finalizing the warrant and coordinating entry teams. What do you want me to do?" "Stay exactly where you are. Don't go back to the estate. Don't contact anyone from the house. Just wait." Waiting. The hardest discipline of all. Naomi spent those days in the hotel room, moving through forms to stay centered, reviewing everything she'd documented over the past 7 months, preparing herself mentally for what came next. There would be testimony, court appearances. Her face would be public. Everyone connected to Kang would know who she was, what she'd done. She'd be a target for the rest of her life. But that had always been the likely outcome. You didn't infiltrate organized crime networks without consequences. The question was whether those consequences were worth it. Whether the women freed and the trafficking operations disrupted justified the price. Naomi thought about the girl in the shipping container in San Pedro, the one who died before help arrived. She thought about her promises that someone would answer, that it wouldn't be meaningless. Yeah, it was worth it. On the morning of the 5th day, her phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. "Problem. Call me." Naomi's stomach dropped. She dialed immediately. "What happened?" Sandra's voice was tense. "The warrant was delayed. Some technical issue with probable cause standards. The judge kicked it back, once more corroborating evidence before authorizing entry. I gave you everything. I described the cages, the women, the exact location. Your testimony is strong, but the defense will argue you were trespassing, that you had no legitimate reason to be in that part of the house, that your observations could have been misinterpreted or exaggerated. The judge wants physical evidence, photos, recordings, something that can't be disputed. I couldn't take photos. The door was locked. I was lucky to see what I saw. I know. I'm not blaming you. I'm explaining why this is taking longer than any of us wanted." Naomi was silent for a moment, thinking, what if I go back? Absolutely not. Your cover is compromised. If Kang suspects anything, he doesn't. If he did, I'd be dead already. As far as he knows, I'm a maid who did some inventory work and went home. I can go back, act normal, and find an opportunity to get photos. That's too risky. We're talking days away from raiding the property. We can wait. Can those women wait? Can the next shipment Kang's coordinating wait? Every day we delay is another day the operation continues. Another day women are trafficked through that house. I didn't spend 7 months building this case to watch it fall apart because of paperwork. Sandra was quiet. Naomi could hear her breathing, could picture her in some FBI office, weighing operational security against the urgency of the situation. Finally, if you do this, and I'm not authorizing it, to be clear, you need to be smart. Get the evidence, and get out. Don't take risks. Don't try to be a hero. When have I ever tried to be a hero? That's what worries me. You've been so focused on the case that you've forgotten you're a person who deserves to survive this. The unexpected empathy made Naomi's throat tight. I'll survive. Just make sure those women do too. She ended the call and stared at her phone. Going back was dangerous. But Sandra was right about one thing. The case was falling apart on technicalities. They needed physical evidence, and Naomi was the only person who could get it. That afternoon, she drove back to the estate. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was racing through scenarios. Best case, she gets the photos without incident and leaves. Worst case, she's caught, and the entire operation collapses. She arrived during normal work hours, parking in the employee lot like she'd done every day for 7 months. The security guard waved her through. Welcome back. You were missed. Thank you. I wasn't feeling well. Mrs. Park wants to see you. That was expected. Naomi went directly to the estate manager's office, knocked, and entered when summoned. Mrs. Park looked up from her desk. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. You were absent for 5 days. No phone call. No explanation. I apologize, Mrs. Park. I was sick. I should have called, but I was unable to leave my apartment. What illness? Stomach flu. I didn't want to risk making the household ill. Mrs. Park studied her for a long moment, looking for deception. Naomi kept her expression neutral, her body language submissive. Just a worried employee, hoping she wouldn't be fired. In the future, you will call, even if you are dying. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Kang is hosting a dinner party tonight. You will assist with service. Tonight. Perfect. The house would be active, full of people, with staff moving through all areas. It would be easier to position herself near the wine cellar without raising suspicion. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for allowing me to return. Mrs. Park dismissed her with a gesture. Naomi bowed and left. The rest of the afternoon passed in familiar routine. She cleaned. She prepared service items. She moved through the house like a ghost. But this time, she was planning, mapping out when and how she could access the wine cellar, what excuse she could use, how long she'd have before someone noticed her absence. The dinner party began at 7. 20 guests, all men, all part of Kang's network. Naomi served drinks, cleared plates, stayed invisible, but she was watching Kang, waiting for the right moment. It came at 8:30. Kang and 3 of his guests excused themselves from the table and headed toward his office. Private business discussion, probably. The kind that meant they'd be occupied for at least 20 minutes. Naomi saw her opportunity. She moved through the house, avoiding the other staff, and approached the wine cellar hallway. The industrial door was closed. She could hear nothing from below. Her phone was in her pocket, camera ready. She just needed 30 seconds, just long enough to open the door, photograph what was below, and retreat before anyone noticed. But as she reached for the keypad, she heard voices behind her, male voices, coming closer. She pivoted immediately, grabbing a cleaning cloth from her apron and pretending to dust a nearby table. 2 bodyguards walked past, not even glancing at her. They were talking in Korean about security rotations. They disappeared around the corner. Naomi waited, counting seconds, making sure they weren't coming back. Then she turned back to the keypad. She'd watched Kang enter the code several times over the past weeks. 6 digits. His fingers moved too fast for her to see the exact sequence, but she'd noticed patterns. His hand moved in a shape, upper left to lower right, which suggested the code followed a diagonal pattern across the keypad. She tried 147258. The light stayed red. Wrong. She tried 159360. Still red. She had maybe one more try before the system locked her out or triggered an alert. She thought about the shape of Kang's hand movement. Not quite diagonal, more like a zigzag. Upper left, middle lower left, upper right, middle, lower right. Iwuchi san wujo. The light turned green. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Naomi's heart hammered. She opened the door just enough to see down the stairs, raised her phone, and started taking photos. The cages, the women, The concrete floor, the buckets, everything. 3 photos. 4. 5. Enough to be undeniable. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs below. Someone was coming up. She closed the door as quietly as possible, made sure it locked, and retreated to the cleaning station around the corner. She was dusting an already clean vase when one of Kang's associates emerged from the wine cellar, adjusting his tie, looking satisfied about something. He walked past without acknowledging her existence. Just another invisible servant. Naomi's hands shook as she held the dusting cloth. She'd done it. She had the evidence. Photos that couldn't be disputed or explained away. Women in cages in Kang Dae-hwan's basement. She needed to get the photos to Sandra immediately. But she couldn't leave during the dinner party. That would be suspicious. She'd have to wait until the event ended, until the guests left, until she could make an excuse to go home early. She continued working, moving through the house, serving drinks, clearing dishes, normal service. But internally, she was counting minutes. At 10:30, something changed. The atmosphere in the house shifted. The guests' conversations became quieter, more tense. Kang emerged from his office looking pleased but also alert, like a man who'd just finalized an important deal, but knew the hardest part was still coming. He gestured to Mrs. Park, gave her instructions in rapid Korean. Mrs. Park nodded and began directing the staff to clear the dining room more quickly than usual. The party was ending early. By 11, the guests were gone. The house staff were dismissed. Naomi grabbed her bag and headed for the service entrance, trying not to move too fast, trying not to look like someone who desperately needed to leave. She was 10 feet from the door when Kang's voice stopped her cold. "You, wait." She turned slowly. Kang was standing at the top of the main staircase, looking down at her. His expression was unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Kang, come here." Every instinct screamed danger, but she couldn't run, couldn't show fear. She walked to the base of the stairs and looked up at him, hands folded, expression neutral. "I've been told you were sick for 5 days. Yes, sir. I apologize for the inconvenience. You look fine to me. I'm feeling better. Thank you for allowing me to return to work." He descended the stairs slowly, each footstep deliberate. When he reached her, he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, subtle, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Do you know what I think?" He spoke English now, his accent minimal, his tone conversational. "I think you weren't sick. I think you were somewhere else, doing something else." Naomi's pulse spiked, but she kept her expression unchanged. "I was in my apartment, sir. I have pharmacy receipts if you need proof of my illness. Receipts can be faked. Hospitals can be bribed. I didn't become successful by trusting people at their word." "I understand, sir. I apologize if my absence caused problems." "It did cause problems, but not the kind you think." He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "You're different from the other staff. I noticed it months ago. You're too controlled, too careful. Most people, when they're slapped, they react. Fear, anger, humiliation. You showed none of that, just stillness. I learned not to react, sir. It's safer. Safer, yes, but stillness can mean many things. It can mean fear, or it can mean discipline. Which is it, I wonder?" Naomi said nothing. Her mind was racing through options. If he knew, if he'd discovered her role, she was dead. But if he was just suspicious, if he was testing her, then reacting wrong would confirm his concerns. "Nothing to say." Kang smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's all right. Actions speak louder than words, and your actions tonight were very interesting." Her blood ran cold. He knew. Somehow, he knew she'd accessed the wine cellar. "You were seen near the restricted areas during the party. The staff are instructed to stay in the public spaces during events. Why were you in the west hallway?" "I heard noise, sir. I thought perhaps something had fallen, something that needed to be cleaned. When I checked and found nothing, I returned to my duties." "You heard noise?" "From the wine cellar. I heard noise from somewhere in that direction. I couldn't identify the source. I apologize if I overstepped." Kang studied her face for a long moment. She held his gaze, not defiant but not completely submissive either, just tired. Just a maid who'd made a minor error in judgment and was hoping it wouldn't cost her the job. Finally, he stepped back. Go home. Come back tomorrow at the usual time. We'll discuss your future employment then. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. She bowed and turned toward the door, forcing herself to walk at a normal pace, to not rush, to not show the terror that was coursing through her veins. Behind her, Kang's voice. Oh, and Naomi? She stopped. He'd never used her name before, never acknowledged that she existed as an individual rather than just staff. Yes, sir. If I find out you've been lying to me about anything, you'll learn that there are worse things than being slapped. I understand, sir. She walked out into the night, got in her car, and drove away. She didn't speed, didn't take unusual routes, just normal driving. But her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold the steering wheel. 5 blocks away, she pulled into a gas station, parked behind the building where she couldn't be seen from the street, and called Sandra. He knows. I don't know how, but he knows something's wrong. Did you get the photos? Yes. But Sandra, he threatened me. Directly. This isn't paranoia. He knows. Send the photos right now. I'll push the raid forward. We'll move tomorrow morning. What do I do? Go somewhere public. Stay visible. If he's going to move against you, he'll wait until you're isolated. Stay in public spaces until we pick you up. Naomi sat in the dark parking lot, phone in her trembling hands, and realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. She'd thought she was hunting Kang, but he'd been watching her too, probably from the moment she was hired, testing her, observing her, waiting to see if she was exactly what she appeared to be or something more dangerous. And tonight, she'd confirmed his suspicions. She'd gotten the evidence, but she'd also revealed herself. The sword was out of its sheath now, and there was no putting it back. Naomi didn't go somewhere public. She went to the one place she knew Kang couldn't follow, her old training ground. Not the school in China that was long gone, reclaimed by the mountains when Master Wei had died 3 years ago. But the principles remained, and in Los Angeles, there was a place where those principles were still practiced. She drove to Chinatown, parked in a structure on Hill Street, and walked 3 blocks to a building that looked abandoned from the outside. Crumbling brick, boarded windows, graffiti in 4 languages. But the side door opened when she knocked with a specific rhythm, and an elderly woman she'd known for years gestured her inside. You look like trouble, Mrs. Lin said in Mandarin. I am trouble. Then you came to the right place. The building's interior was nothing like its exterior. The main space had been converted into a practice hall. Polished wooden floors, mirrors along one wall, traditional weapons mounted on another. At this hour, near midnight, it should have been empty. But there were 6 people training, moving through forms with practiced precision, bodies flowing like water, strikes connecting with heavy bags in rhythms older than memory. This was where Master Wei's lineage had continued after the school closed. Students scattered across the world, carrying the discipline forward, keeping the tradition alive in empty buildings and secret spaces where people who needed something more than gyms could find it. Naomi bowed to the room. The practitioners acknowledged her without breaking their forms. She moved to the changing area, removed her work clothes, and put on training gear she kept in a locker here for moments like this. Then she stepped onto the floor and began. The forms came back instantly, muscle memory deeper than thought. She started with the foundation sequences, the basic movements that had been drilled into her 10,000 times as a teenager. Step, turn, block, strike. Weight shifts from legs to hips, to shoulders, to fists. Power generated not from individual muscles, but from the whole body moving as one integrated system. As she moved, the fear began to drain away, not because the danger was gone, but because she remembered who she was underneath the disguise she'd been wearing for 7 months. Not a maid, not a victim, a practitioner, someone who'd spent years learning to transform fear into focus, rage into discipline, chaos into control. She transitioned to combat sequences. These were different, faster, more aggressive, designed for situations where defense wasn't enough. Strikes meant to end threats permanently. Master Wei had taught her these reluctantly, warning that knowing how to kill was a burden most people couldn't carry without being corrupted by it. The forms teach you how to hurt people, Wei had said, but the philosophy teaches you why you shouldn't. Both lessons are equally important. Learn the first without the second, and you become the thing you're trying to fight. Naomi had asked, what if someone needs to be fought? What if they're hurting others? Then you fight, but not with anger, not with hatred, with the same calm you use in meditation, because the moment you enjoy violence, the moment it feels good to hurt someone, you've lost yourself, and you'll never find your way back. Now, moving through sequences in the practice hall, Naomi felt the truth of that teaching. She could hurt Kang, could hurt all of them, the bodyguards, the associates, everyone connected to the trafficking operation. Her body knew how, but doing so would destroy the case, would let the network survive, would sacrifice hundreds of victims to satisfy her need for immediate justice. That wasn't strength, that was indulgence, and Master Wei had taught her better. She finished the sequence and stood in the center of the floor, breathing hard, sweat dripping, mind finally clear. Mrs. Lin approached with a towel and a bottle of water. Whatever trouble you're in, fighting won't solve it, the old woman said. I know, but it helps me remember who I am. Good, because you looked lost when you came in. Naomi drank the water, let her heart rate slow. Do you ever wonder if we're taught these forms for nothing? If all this discipline is just preparing us for situations that never come? The situations always come. That's why we prepare. And if the situation requires us to do nothing, to watch suffering and wait. Mrs. Lin was quiet for a moment. Then, there's a story Master Wei told me once, about a student who asked why they had to practice restraint when the world was full of people who deserved punishment. Master Wei said, because the world doesn't need more punishers, it needs more protectors, and the difference between those two things is discipline. Naomi nodded slowly. She'd heard versions of that story before, but tonight it hit differently, because tomorrow the FBI would raid Kang's estate, the women would be freed, the network would be disrupted, and it would happen not because Naomi had fought, but because she'd documented, not because she'd punished, but because she'd protected. The sword had stayed in its sheath, and that restraint, that patience, that refusal to indulge in violence, even when justified, that was the real victory. She trained for another hour, working through forms until her body was too tired to think, until the fear and anger were transformed into exhaustion and clarity. Then she showered, changed, and thanked Mrs. Lin. Where will you go now? The old woman asked. Somewhere public. I need to stay visible until morning. Then go to the 24-hour dim sum place on Broadway. Tell them I sent you. They'll give you a quiet booth in the back where you can watch the door, and they'll make sure no one bothers you. Naomi bowed gratefully. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. And when this is over, come back and teach. We need practitioners who understand the difference between fighting and protecting. Naomi left the practice hall feeling centered in a way she hadn't felt in months. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was clear. She walked to the dim sum place, mentioned Mrs. Lin, and was given a corner booth where she could see everyone who entered. She ordered tea and dumplings and waited. The restaurant was busy even at 2 a.m, night workers, students, insomniacs, people who lived their lives on different schedules than the rest of the world. No one paid attention to her. She was just another tired person eating cheap food at an unreasonable hour. She checked her phone. A message from Sandra. Photos received. Evidence is solid. Raid approved for 6 a.m. Where are you? Naomi typed. Safe. Public place. We'll stay here until you give the all clear. The response came immediately. Good. Stay alert. Don't engage if Kang's people find you. Just run. Naomi almost smiled at that, as if running had ever been her instinct. But Sandra meant well, and she was right. Engaging now would ruin everything. The case was solid. The raid was approved. In 4 hours, this would all be over. She just had to survive until then. The hours passed slowly. She ordered more tea, watched customers come and go, and kept her phone within reach. At 4:30, the restaurant began to empty, the late-night crowd transitioning to the early morning one. In 90 minutes, federal agents would surround Kang's estate. 90 minutes, until the women were freed. At 5:15, 3 men walked into the restaurant. Korean, well-dressed, moving with the kind of confidence that came from believing you were untouchable. They scanned the room methodically, looking for someone, looking for her. Naomi's pulse quickened. They were at the other end of the restaurant, hadn't spotted her yet. She had maybe 30 seconds before they worked their way to her booth. She stood, left cash on the table, and walked toward the kitchen. Not running, just moving with purpose, like someone who needed to use the bathroom. The kitchen staff looked up in surprise as she walked through, but no one stopped her. She found the back exit, pushed through, and emerged into an alley behind the restaurant. The early morning air was cold. The sky was just beginning to lighten. She could hear traffic from Broadway, the city waking up. She pulled out her phone to call Sandra, but before she could dial, a car pulled into the alley, blocking her exit. 2 more men got out, also Korean, also clearly looking for her. They'd found her. Somehow, despite her precautions, despite staying public, Kang's people had tracked her down. The men approached slowly, spreading out to block any escape routes. One of them spoke in accented English. "Mr. Kang would like to speak with you." "I'm not interested." That wasn't a request. Naomi assessed her options. 5 men total, 3 in the restaurant, 2 in the alley, all probably armed. Fighting was possible but would end badly. Running was also possible, but they had vehicles and backup, which left talking. "I'll come with you, but not to the estate. Somewhere public. I'm not stupid." The man smiled without humor. "Mr. Kang doesn't meet in public places, especially not with people he doesn't trust." "Then we have a problem, because I'm not getting in that car." The man sighed, like this was all very tedious. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Naomi shifted her weight, hands loose at her sides. Ready. The alley was narrow, that limited how many could attack at once. The car was positioned wrong, too close to the wall, which meant they'd have trouble opening doors quickly if she managed to move the confrontation. But before anyone could make a move, another car pulled into the alley. This one had lights on the dashboard. Federal agents. Sandra got out first, flanked by 2 other FBI agents. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to step away from Miss Brooks. Right now." The Korean men froze. One reached for his waistband, but Sandra's hand moved to her own weapon. "Don't even think about it. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and committing about 6 federal crimes right now. Make smart choices." For a moment, no one moved. Then the lead man raised his hand slowly and stepped back. The others followed. Within minutes, they were all on their knees, hands behind their heads, being secured by agents who'd appeared from unmarked vehicles at both ends of the alley. Sandra walked to Naomi. "You okay? How did you find me?" "We've been tracking Kang's people since midnight. When they started moving toward Chinatown, I figured they'd found you somehow. I've had teams in the area for the past hour." Sandra looked at the men being secured. "This gives us conspiracy charges on top of everything else. Attempting to kidnap a federal witness. The raid is happening right now. I got the call 5 minutes ago. We have the estate surrounded. Everyone inside is in custody, or will be soon." Naomi felt something loosen in her chest, relief, so profound it was almost painful. "The women? Safe. We found them exactly where you said they'd be. 4 women in the basement, plus 2 more in the hidden guest wing rooms. All alive, all receiving medical care. 6 women. Not hundreds, but 6 real human beings who would go to sleep tonight somewhere safe instead of in cages. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was real. It mattered." "What happens now?" Naomi asked. "Now we debrief. You give a formal statement. We build the prosecution case, and you figure out what comes next for you." "I don't understand." "Your cover's blown. Your face will be in every filing, every court document. Everyone connected to this network will know who you are, what you did. You can't go back to undercover work. Not safely." Naomi hadn't thought about that. had been so focused on finishing the operation that she hadn't considered what came after. She'd spent 7 months being someone else, had gotten so deep in the role that she'd almost forgotten there was supposed to be something after it ended. "I'll figure something out," she said. Sandra nodded. "For now, let's get you somewhere secure. You can sleep, eat real food, be yourself for a while. Then we'll talk about next steps." They walked out of the alley together, past the men being loaded into police vehicles, past the restaurant where she'd spent the last few hours waiting. The sun was rising over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The city looked almost beautiful at this hour, before the traffic and smog turned it back into its usual chaotic self. Somewhere in Beverly Hills, Kang Dae-hwan was being arrested. Somewhere, 6 women were being freed from cages. Somewhere, a case was being built that would dismantle at least part of the trafficking network that had operated with impunity for so long. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was justice, and that would have to be enough. The arrest didn't happen the way Sandra described, because 3 days before the federal raid, Kang Dae-hwan announced he was hosting his annual investor gala, and Naomi received orders to work the event. "I can't," she told Sandra during an emergency meeting in a parking garage. "He knows something's wrong. Sending me to the gala is a test, or a trap. Then don't go. We can move the raid forward. You said you needed more time, that the warrant wasn't solid yet. It's not, but it's better than you walking into a situation where Kang has confirmed you're a threat." Naomi was quiet, thinking. The gala would bring together everyone important in Kang's network. Associates from Seattle, Phoenix, San Francisco, money people, logistics coordinators, everyone who made the trafficking operation possible. How many arrests could you make at the gala? If everyone's there. Sandra's expression sharpened. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you're worried about the case falling apart on technicalities, having all the key players in one place might solve that problem. Conspiracy charges, racketeering. You'd have them all, and you'd be in the middle of it. Exposed. Probably dead. Not if you move fast." Sandra ran her hands through her hair, clearly torn between operational opportunity and protecting her asset. "This is insane. It's effective. It's suicide." "No. Suicide is letting this network continue because we were too cautious to take the shot when we had it." They argued for another 20 minutes, but eventually, Sandra agreed to the plan. Naomi would work the gala, would wear a wire, would gather evidence and testimony that would make the case unassailable, and when the moment was right, federal agents would move in and arrest everyone present. It was risky, potentially catastrophic, but it was also the kind of opportunity that might not come again. The gala was scheduled for Saturday evening. Naomi spent the intervening days preparing not just logistically, but mentally, because she knew this was the moment everything would break. One way or another, the pretense would end. She would either emerge victorious or not at all. She thought about Masterway's teachings, about the sword that never left its sheath, but she also remembered something else her teacher had said. There's a moment in every conflict where restraint becomes complicity, where choosing not to act is itself an action. Knowing that moment when it comes, that's wisdom. This was that moment. Saturday arrived cold and clear. Naomi, dressed in her service uniform, checked the wire hidden in her clothes and drove to the estate. The guards at the gate waved her through. She parked and entered through the service entrance. The house was transformed. Crystal, flowers, elegant lighting, everything designed to make powerful people feel even more powerful. Catering staff moved through the space with practiced efficiency, setting up bars and food stations. Musicians were tuning instruments in the ballroom. Mrs. Park appeared with instructions. "You will serve drinks during the reception hour, then assist with dinner service. Mr. Kang expects perfection tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because there will be very important guests, people who don't tolerate mistakes." Naomi bowed and took her position. The wire pressed against her skin, a constant reminder that everything said tonight was being recorded, that federal agents were positioned around the estate, waiting for her signal. The guests began arriving at 7. Expensive cars, Elegant clothes, faces Naomi recognized from months of documentation. She served champagne and watched, memorizing who spoke to who seemed nervous, who seemed confident. At 8, Kang made his entrance. He was wearing a bespoke suit, smiling his charming public smile, working the room like the sophisticated businessman he pretended to be. But Naomi could see the truth underneath the predator's calculation, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. He saw her across the room and his smile shifted slightly. Not gone, but changed. A private acknowledgement that he knew something she didn't want him to know. The reception hour passed. Guests moved to the ballroom for dinner. Naomi served wine, cleared plates, and listened to conversations that were supposedly private, but were being recorded by the wire she wore. Then, during dessert service, Kang stood and called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight. This annual gathering represents more than just business. It represents trust, loyalty, the understanding that we are bound together by common interests and mutual protection." Polite applause. Naomi moved between tables, refilling water glasses. Invisible. "But trust requires vigilance," Kang continued. "We must always be aware of threats to our enterprise. Internal threats. People who present themselves as loyal while working against us." The room went quiet. Naomi's pulse quickened. Kang looked directly at her. "Which is why I'd like to introduce someone you should all know. Naomi Brooks. Please step forward." Every head turned. Naomi froze, caught in the spotlight of attention. Her mind raced. This was it. The moment where cover ended. The question was whether she controlled how it ended, or Kang did. "Now, Naomi." Kang's voice was soft but commanding. She stepped forward, hands steady, expression neutral. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing fear. "Tell our guests what you really do," Kang said. "And before you think about lying, know that I've had you investigated for the past month. I know about your FBI handler. I know about your dead drops. I know everything." The room erupted in movement, men standing, hands reaching for weapons, security closing in. But Naomi stood still, centered, waiting for the moment. It came when Kang moved toward her, hand raised like he was going to strike her again, like he'd done that first night. He wanted her to flinch, to show fear, to prove she was just another victim of his power. Instead, Naomi caught his wrist mid-strike, not with anger, with precision. The room gasped. Kang's eyes widened not with fear, but with surprised recognition. This woman he'd dismissed as weak, as helpless, as just another disposable person, had stopped him with a grip that suggested years of training. "You're right," Naomi said clearly, making sure the wire picked up every word. "I am FBI, and everything you've said and done in this house for the past 7 months has been documented. Your trafficking operation, your money laundering, your conspiracy, all of it." She released his wrist and stepped back. "And right now, federal agents are surrounding this estate. Everyone here is under arrest." Chaos erupted. Men ran for exits. Security drew weapons. But before anyone could shoot, before the situation could spiral into violence, flashbang grenades came through the windows, and FBI teams poured in from every entrance. The room filled with smoke, shouting, and the sounds of zip ties being secured around wrists. Naomi dropped to the floor, hands over her head, letting the agents do their work. She'd done her part. Now it was their turn. When the smoke cleared, Kang was on his knees, hands cuffed behind his back, staring at her with something that might have been respect, or might have been hatred. Hard to tell. Sandra appeared, helped Naomi to her feet. "You okay?" "I'm fine." That was the most dangerous, reckless, idiotic thing I've ever seen an operative do. "Did it work?" Sandra looked around at the room full of arrested criminals, all of them connected to trafficking networks across the West Coast. "Yeah, it worked." The interrogations took 3 days. Naomi sat in federal building rooms in downtown Los Angeles and told the same story over and over, to different prosecutors, different agents, different people who needed to understand exactly what she'd witnessed, documented, and endured. She described the cages, the women, the conversations, the money flows, the logistics of how human beings were trafficked through a Beverly Hills mansion, while neighbors looked the other way, and society pretended such things didn't happen in nice neighborhoods. Some of the prosecutors looked sick. Some looked angry. All of them took meticulous notes. "Your testimony will be crucial," one said. "Kang's lawyers will argue everything was taken out of context, that you misunderstood what you saw, that you're not credible because you were working undercover. We need you to be rock solid." "I'll be rock solid." And she was. At the preliminary hearings, at the arraignments, at every step of the legal process, she spoke clearly, answered every question, and never wavered, because this was what she'd signed up for. Not the danger, not the violence, the accountability, making powerful men answer for what they'd done. The media coverage was intense. Beverly Hills mansion trafficked women for years. Read the headlines. FBI infiltrates Korean Mafia network. Undercover Maid takes down trafficking ring. Naomi didn't read the articles, didn't watch the news, let her lawyers handle the public narrative while she focused on the legal one. The women from the basement were placed in protective custody, given medical care and counseling. Naomi was allowed to meet with them once, briefly, through interpreters. "Thank you," one said, the woman who'd closed her eyes in resignation that night. Naomi had first seen the cages. "We thought no one knew, that no one would care." "I cared," Naomi said, "and I'm sorry it took so long. You saved us. That's what matters." But it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like arithmetic. 6 women freed, but how many still trapped in other houses, other basements, other systems Kang's network had built? The operation had been dismantled, but networks adapted. New financiers would emerge, new logistics coordinators. The demand for trafficked people hadn't disappeared just because one supplier had been arrested. Sandra understood. "You can't save everyone," she said one afternoon as they walked through Grand Park in downtown LA. "You know that, right? Intellectually, yes. But emotionally, I think about all the women I didn't see, the ones in Phoenix and Seattle, the ones still trapped, because I focused on Kang instead of the whole network. You focused on what you could actually accomplish. That's not failure. That's wisdom." Naomi wasn't sure she believed that, but she appreciated Sandra trying. The trial date was set for 6 months out. Kang and 17 co-defendants, all facing federal charges, including conspiracy to commit human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and a dozen other counts. The prosecution's case was solid. Naomi's testimony, financial records, physical evidence from the estate, and statements from several co-defendants who'd taken plea deals. Kang's lawyers fought hard, but they were facing an impossible task. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too much documentation of systematic crimes committed over years. The trial lasted 5 weeks. Naomi testified for 2 days, walking the jury through everything she'd witnessed. Defense attorneys tried to break her, to suggest she'd misunderstood or exaggerated or had ulterior motives, but she stayed calm, answered clearly, and let the evidence speak for itself. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, Kang showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead while the judge read count after count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Sentencing was scheduled for a month later. Life in federal prison, without possibility of parole. It was over. 7 months of undercover work. 3 months of legal proceedings, and finally, justice. Naomi sat in the courtroom and felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just exhaustion. The kind that came from holding tension for so long that when it finally released, you didn't know what to do with the space it left behind. After the sentencing, Sandra took her to dinner at a Korean restaurant in Koreatown, which might have seemed insensitive given the circumstances. But Sandra had a point to make. "This isn't about ethnicity or nationality," Sandra said over bibimbap. "This is about criminals who happen to be Korean, just like there are criminals who are white, black, Latino, whatever. Don't let this operation turn into something racist in your mind." "I know that. Do you?" "Because I've seen operators come out of long-term undercover work with all kinds of distorted thinking. You spent 7 months in a world where bad people happen to share certain characteristics. It's easy to start seeing patterns that aren't really there. Naomi appreciated the concern, even if it was unnecessary. Her training had been too thorough, her perspective too balanced. But Sandra was right, that undercover work could warp your worldview if you let it. What happens now? Naomi asked. Now you rest. Then we talk about what comes next. I thought my undercover career was over. It is. Your face is too public now. But there are other roles. Training, analysis, consulting on operations. You have knowledge that's valuable. The question is whether you want to keep working in this field or do something completely different. Naomi didn't have an answer to that. For the past 7 months, her entire identity had been built around bringing down Kang's network. Now that it was done, she didn't know who she was supposed to be. The girl who'd trained in Chinese mountains, the woman who'd documented atrocities in Beverly Hills, the person who'd promised a dying girl in a shipping container that her death would mean something. All of those. None of those. Someone new, maybe. Someone who'd seen the worst of human nature and chosen to fight it not with violence, but with patience, documentation, and the slow work of justice. I need time, she said. Take it. You've earned it. They finished dinner and parted ways. Naomi drove to Santa Monica, walked along the beach, and let the Pacific Ocean remind her that the world was bigger than courtrooms and trafficking networks, and 7 months of pretending to be someone she wasn't. She'd kept her promise. The girl in the shipping container hadn't died meaninglessly. Kang had answered for his crimes. 6 women were free. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was real. It mattered. And that would have to be enough. 6 months after the verdict, Naomi stood in front of a training class at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. 20 new agents, fresh from their basic training, eager to do good work, and naive about how hard it would be. She'd been asked to give a presentation on long-term undercover operations, the psychological challenges, the ethical dilemmas, the skills required to maintain cover while gathering evidence. The hardest part isn't the danger, she told them. It's the helplessness. You'll see suffering you can't immediately stop. You'll watch crimes happen and do nothing, because acting would compromise the operation. You'll lie in bed at night wondering if you're a coward or a professional. The answer is you're both, and neither. A young agent raised her hand. How do you deal with that? The guilt? You don't deal with it. You carry it. But you remember why you're carrying it, because sometimes the only way to help people is to let them suffer a little longer while you build a case that will help many more. It's terrible arithmetic, but it's the arithmetic that actually saves lives. After the presentation, several agents came up with questions. One, a young woman named Jessica, hung back until the others left. I read about your case, Jessica said. The Beverly Hills operation. I wanted to thank you. For what? My sister was trafficked 8 years ago. We never found her. But seeing someone actually bring down a network, actually get justice, it helped. Made me feel like maybe someone, somewhere is fighting for people like my sister. Naomi didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry about your sister. Me too. But I'm glad people like you are out there, doing the hard work. After Jessica left, Naomi sat alone in the empty classroom thinking about what the young agent had said. That seeing justice happen helped. That someone fighting mattered, even if it didn't save every person, even if it didn't fix every wrong. Maybe that was the real lesson from the operation. Not that patience was always rewarded, or that discipline always won, or that good people always triumphed, but that fighting mattered, that trying mattered, that refusing to give up, even when the world made it clear how little power you actually had that mattered. Naomi had been weak once, not physically, but morally. She'd seen suffering as a child and had done nothing because she was too young, too powerless, too scared. Her parents had died because she hadn't been strong enough to stop the violence that took them. Master Wei had taught her strength, not the kind that came from muscles or weapons, but the kind that came from knowing who you were and what you stood for. The kind that let you walk into a mansion full of predators and stay centered, stay disciplined, stay focused on the goal even when every cell in your body screamed to fight back. That was real power, and she'd proven she had it. The FBI offered her a Continue. 11:22 p.m. Permanent position as a training consultant. She accepted, not because she wanted to stay in law enforcement forever, but because she wanted to help other agents learn what she'd learned, that justice was slow, messy, imperfect, but worth fighting for anyway. She also started teaching at Mrs. Lin's practice hall in Chinatown, not traditional martial arts, but something new, a synthesis of Master Wei's philosophy with practical skills for people who needed to defend themselves or others, self-defense for vulnerable populations, de-escalation techniques, how to read violence before it happened. "Why do you teach this?" Mrs. Lin asked one evening after class. "Because I want people to know they have power, even when the world tells them they don't, even when they're cleaning floors and bowing to monsters. They have power. They just need to know how to access it." Mrs. Lin smiled. "Master Wei would be proud." "I hope so." The practice hall became Naomi's real home, the place where she could be herself, not an FBI consultant, not a witness in an ongoing legal case, not a symbol of anything, just a practitioner, someone who'd learned difficult lessons and wanted to pass them on. One evening, a new student arrived, young, black, with haunted eyes that suggested she'd seen things no one should have to see. She reminded Naomi of herself at that age, angry, grieving, looking for something to make sense of a world that had proven itself cruel. "I heard you teach people how to fight," the girl said. "I teach people how to not need to fight. It's different. What if I want to hurt someone? What if they deserve it?" Naomi looked at the girl and saw the knife's edge she was balanced on, the moment where you chose between becoming a protector or becoming another predator. "Then I'll teach you how to hurt them," Naomi said quietly. "But first, I'll teach you why you shouldn't. And if you still want to after that, then we'll talk about whether this is the right place for you." The girl was silent, processing. Then, "Okay, teach me." And Naomi did. For weeks, for months, she taught the girl the same lessons Master Wei had taught her: discipline, restraint, precision, how to transform anger into focus, how to make yourself into something unbreakable, not through violence but through self-knowledge. The girl's name was Keisha. She'd lost her mother to domestic violence and wanted revenge. Naomi understood that impulse, had felt it herself after losing her parents, but she also knew that revenge was quicksand. It looked solid until you stepped on it, and then it dragged you down. "There's a difference between justice and revenge," Naomi told Keisha one evening after practice. "Justice repairs. Revenge just adds more broken things to the world. Sometimes the only way to honor someone you've lost is to become someone they'd be proud of." Keisha was quiet. Then, "How do you know all this?" "Because I had to learn it the hard way, and I'm trying to save you some time." Whether Keisha would listen was up to her, but Naomi was planting seeds, giving the girl options she might not know she had. That was all any teacher could do. The civil lawsuits from Kang's victims took years to resolve, but eventually, settlements were reached. The women from the basement received compensation, not enough to erase what they'd suffered, but enough to start new lives. Naomi testified in those proceedings too, adding her voice to theirs, making sure the legal system acknowledged what had been done. Some people called her a hero. She rejected that framing. Heroes acted in moments. She'd acted over months, through patience and documentation. That wasn't heroism. That was just work. But the label stuck anyway. Beverly Hills hero continues fighting for victims. Read one headline: "Former undercover agent now trains FBI in patience." Naomi stopped reading the articles. Let people think what they wanted. She knew the truth, that she'd been terrified most of the time, that she'd almost broken cover a dozen times, that luck had played as much a role as skill in the operation's success. But she also knew she'd kept her promises, to the girl in the shipping container, to the women in the cages, to herself. She'd proven that patience was stronger than rage, that discipline was more powerful than violence, that the sword that stayed sheathed was the most dangerous weapon of all. Not because it was never used, but because everyone knew it could be. And that knowledge, that certainty that justice would eventually come, that predators would eventually answer, that was what made monsters afraid. Naomi stood in the practice hall one evening, alone, moving through the forms Master Wei had taught her years ago. Her body remembered every movement. Her mind remembered every lesson. And somewhere, in mountains she'd never see again, in a school that no longer existed, her teacher's voice echoed. The greatest victory is the fight you never have to have. Remember that. She remembered. She'd always remember. And she'd spend the rest of her life teaching others the same truth, that real strength wasn't about how much damage you could do, but about how much damage you could prevent, not through violence, but through discipline, patience, and the refusal to become the thing you were fighting. They'd thought she was weak, thought silence meant submission, thought invisibility meant powerlessness. They'd been wrong about all of it. She was never weak. She was disciplined, and discipline, in the end, was the strongest force in the world.